All right. We're live and ready for action. Thank you everybody for joining us. We're here to talk about how the world cannot afford to fail online learning going forward, and we have a fantastic panel of folks to talk about that. I'm Mickey Revenaugh. I'm the moderator. I think I got picked because I've been doing this since practically the dawn of time, but I'm really thrilled actually to bring these other voices to the fore. So what I'm going to do to get started, because we have a really diverse group of panelists here, is I'm going to call on each person and have them do two things really quickly. First, just describe what part of the online learning elephant they have their hands on, so to speak, and then one thing that really surprised them about this emergency remote learning period that we're just coming out of. And I'm actually going to start with Chandre Sanchez-Reyez to speak first. Chandre, tell us where you're coming from on this online learning stuff and what surprised you.
Well, good afternoon, morning, evening, depending on the time zone that you're in. I'm Chandre Sanchez-Reyez. I'm the school leader for two online, fully virtual schools, Indiana Connections Academy and Indiana Connections Career Academy. And it's my pleasure to serve those schools for a number of years. To Mickey's point, I think the thing that surprised me the most, and it was a good surprise, it was sort of the brick and mortars. I'm from K-12, so the brick and mortars and sort of the virtual schools coming together really well and collaborating, sharing best practices and shared practices for everything from how to engage students to how to look at schoolwork to how to design content. That was just really nice to see. That hasn't occurred as regularly, I think, as it does in our own little pockets, brick and mortar to brick and mortar and virtual to virtual. So that was really surprising and enjoyable to watch and be a part of.
Excellent. Well, we'll come back to that in just a minute to see what part of that spirit we get to keep going forward. I'm going to jump over to Dee Ranieri. Dee, you're from a different part of the world in terms of online learning. Say what that is, and then what surprised you the most?
Well, I'll introduce myself. So Dee Ranieri, Vice President, Senior Vice Chancellor for Experiential Digital and Global Education at Northeastern University. I oversee both traditional residential education, online learning. So anything, online that we're doing to enrich the traditional experience. I also oversee all of our B2B work, supporting professional learners. So what surprised me, a good surprise, there was a bad surprise too, but a good surprise is just how quickly, institutions managed to pivot into the online space so that we could keep classes running. I was just amazed at how quickly people came together, worked together, the team supporting them to move into online or onto online to support our learners.
So tell us the bad surprise too.
Oh, okay. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, what was the bad surprise? Well, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, right? Which is the bad rap that online education, has gotten because of what we had to do in the spring. And, for me, that for most institutions, it wasn't really online education, it was remote teaching. We all know that done right, online education is a really high quality experience. It can be engaging and interactive, can include immersive experiences, personalized pathways. I could go on and on. It really can be an amazing high quality experience. But unfortunately, most faculty and institutions, many of them just didn't have a chance to create. They didn't have the time to create those great experiences. So unfortunately, online education took a bit of a hit. So that was a frustration for me.
Well, that's a perfect tee up for Jared. Jared, you come at this from a slightly different angle, and the idea of experience, I know, is something that's really important to you. So if you could introduce yourself and then say a little bit about what it is that you do and what surprised you during this time.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. So my name is Jared Schiffman. I'm the co-founder of Phenomena. We are a new platform for interactive first active engagement and experiential learning. We're starting with science and going to be expanding outward from there. Really, the intent is to design an entirely new type of digital experience that is visual first as opposed to text first. The surprise for me, which I suppose shouldn't have been a surprise, but was a bit of a shock. I'm a parent of a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and our daughter, had to submit, her assignments, and part of it was submitting a video, and then of course, attaching a photo online. And I think she probably spent, maybe 10 minets on the 15 minutes on the assignment at most, but at easily 20 to 25 minutes attaching stickers around her face, afterward, and that was a new experience. I'm not sure that was what the teacher intended, but she certainly learned a lot about sticker placement, during that time.
Well, and that says something about creativity and having new tools, right? So we'll come back to that.
It wasn't, the intention wasn't an art lesson, but it certainly ended up being that.
So Mike, let's loop around to you, because you're big into the kinds of tools that educators need to do this well. Talk a little bit about yourself, your company, and then the one thing that you found most surprising during this time.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm Mike Silagadze. I'm the founder and CEO of Tophat. Best way to think about Tophat is we are a Swiss Army knife for faculty and institutions to implement active learning experience. So we help schools move off of traditional print textbook materials, traditional sage on the stage teaching styles. In general, help schools implement active learning pedagogy through technology and support. We've got a couple million students, tens of thousands of faculty that use Tophat, mostly in North America, but worldwide as well. Frankly, one of the things that's been surprising, we've had an opportunity to work with a large number of faculty as they were making this transition to first remote teaching and now to proper online instruction. Is that in many ways online can actually do things better or do things that are not possible in a traditional synchronous environment. And one of the things that facilitates that is that the interaction between faculty and students happens through one shared medium that allows you to pull a lot of data out of that experience and provide that data as a sort of continuous feedback loop back to the faculty member. That has been fascinating to watch, because what it leads to is just a far greater focus on pedagogy than we've ever seen in probably the history of higher education. And that's phenomenal. I think higher education will, as a result, emerge stronger out of this whole crazy situation we're in.
Right. Hang on to that thought. We'll come back to it. And Rod, I purposely am coming to you last because I think you have the broadest purview here of anyone. Can you talk a little bit about sort of where you're situated in terms of online learning and the thing that surprised you the most?
Thank you very much, Mickey. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me here. It's not just broad, it's also long. You described yourself as being near the dawn of time. I think I was there at the very beginning in terms of my sort of involvement in education. I'm president for the UK and global online learning for the education company Pearson, of which Connections Academy is a very important part. The thing that I think the thing that surprised me was just how quickly, a bit like Dee, how quickly everybody grabbed hold of the online opportunity. So there was a very quick move to remote learning. But I think the thing that it surprised me equally was what that really meant. I mean, my daughter's a teacher, and I remember having a conversation with her, and she said, "Dad, this is fantastic. I mean, I've got kids who are really shining in ways that they didn't shine in the classroom, but in online, they're really doing stuff that I never believed they could do. But the problem is, I don't know whether they're learning anything." So there was a huge amount of engagement. There was a lot of activity. There was a lot of action, but she didn't know if they were learning anything. And it just for me, that was it just showed that. And by the way, I've heard that from many teachers since. And this idea of engagement is one thing, instruction is one thing, teaching is one thing, learning is another thing. So how do we, I mean, technology has the capability to help teachers to make sure that kids are actually learning stuff, not just listening to stuff. And how do we make sure that those capabilities are really made available, so that it's not just teaching, it's also learning that's supported. And I think that was something that I've thought a lot about since. I think we have a bit of work to do there.
Well, and that's a perfect tee up of where I'd love to go next with this panel, because each of you sort of highlighted something positive that you felt came out of this, but you know, sort of suggested also a bit of work that we need to do as well. So to Rod's question, how can we ensure that learning is happening in addition to, first of all, the fact that engaging instruction is happening, I think is a huge leap forward, frankly. But then how do we make sure that learning is happening as well? And Chandre, I don't know if you want to tackle that as our K-12 person in the room here. You know, how already your school is looking at doing that, but what more we can do to make sure that students are learning in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, you know, online learning, as everyone has spoke about, has the endless possibilities to gather data, to look at data, to break it into smaller groups, and to teach or develop lessons or contents for a specific group that you can have at a specific time. And as a former classroom teacher myself, that was very difficult to do in a classroom of 40 high school students. You go over here and work on this while I'm not with you, and then you go over here and work on this while I'm not with you, and I'll see what we can all accomplish. In the online environment, you can break those up, and you know, there's a myriad of ways that you can arrange that activity. I love the idea that we have that opportunity, but even in online learning, we have to always stop and make sure that we're actually looking at the learning. It's very easy to mix the engagement with the learning in an online environment. And I think that's probably, for someone that works in completely virtual education, that's still difficult. And you have to be very precise and intentional about sort of separating those data points. And I think for folks coming from the brick and mortar world, K-12 or higher ed, it can be a pitfall that you might encounter early on in that breakdown of data and looking at how we're going to get kids to learn. Just because they're engaged and they're participating, to Rod's point, I don't know if they're really learning. So we've got to find some of those things that we used in front of individuals, body cues, making sure we're looking for, you know, in the education world, we say exit tickets, but, you know, checks for understanding throughout, and making sure that we're actually intentional about asking all of our students and looking at all of the tiles on the screen, or waiting for all of the students to respond in the chat pod or whatever it may be, just like we would if we were walking around a room or individually working with a student. So I think those are some of the things you just have to be cautious of as we move forward. There's lots of amazing technology, and Mike mentioned a few, and his organization does a lot of that. There's amazing things out there. You don't have to use them all, though, to be able to make sure that students are learning online. You just have to have a process and a procedure to make sure you're looking at all of those data points on a regular basis. And I guess pushing it back out to the students, making sure you're identifying where those gaps are, what they missed, what they need more help on, and then organizing that time around that.
So I see a bunch of nodding heads. Dee, did you want to respond to that from where you're sitting? And I know Mike probably has a few blades on his Swiss Army knife that could come into play here.
Absolutely. But maybe I'll just add one thing to what Chandre said, agree with everything she said, but also getting the students to apply what they're learning, right? So giving them some of those, you know, real life examples, those case studies, actually getting them to apply the learning to make sure that they truly are understanding. So to me, application, experiential learning, which is what we do a lot of, you know, and there are ways to do that, you know, online very well. So really, for me, it's about that application as well, getting them to actually use it. So I thought I would add that.
That's right. Mike, did you want to respond?
I think, for sure. One of the things that, you know, time and time again, pretty much every, you know, broad review of the best practices around pedagogy shows time and time again that one of the top things that that you can do to improve student outcomes, learning, ultimately, content retention, is frequent feedback. I mean, just a constant feedback loop to the student, whether it's in group setting, individual setting, whether they're studying in a self-paced manner or in a classroom. Feedback is absolutely critical, and that's one of the things that I think in online becomes so much more possible and so much more powerful, because not only because you can now provide feedback to students in that, when they're reading the book, now they're doing assessments and activities all throughout. When they're participating in a lesson, they're getting feedback all throughout through activities, homework, etc. And there's a variety of tools, not just Tophat. Lots of tools can give you some of those types of feedback. But the exciting thing to us is now what's possible is that same kind of feedback to an instructor, to the actual faculty member, that I don't know that was ever possible to the same degree. One of the things we're doing that I'm really excited about, super interested in, is actually collecting that engagement data in real time and then compiling it and presenting it back to the faculty member, so that the faculty member can say, hey, I just droned on for 10 minutes and my engagement scores went down 20%. And then, I asked a question and the engagement scores shot way up. That kind of feedback, almost the way you coach an athlete, for running or whatever sport, that kind of feedback, I think, will ultimately allow faculty members to really level up their pedagogy and their teaching in a way that I don't know was ever possible before in a traditional setting, but even online, given the innovation that's been happening.
So Jared, I'd love for you to bring an immersive experiential lens from a technology point into this as well. I mean, most of what we experience in online learning is a little two-dimensional still, and a little linear. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about breaking out of those boxes.
Yeah, sure. And I turn the question on its head a little bit, which is to say, how are we so sure that, pre-pandemic, that students were learning before? What were the methods that we're actually utilizing? And if you're looking at, a test, any sort of test that takes place on a piece of paper, that can pretty well be replicated online and with all the analytics and everything else that you attach to it. So I feel like if the metrics that we were using previously, certainly exist online today. All that said, I would argue that the sort of failures in sort of traditional methods are the failures in sort of digital learning today. The digital resources available today, for the most part, resemble the paper textbooks that we had 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now there are certainly exceptions to that, but unfortunately those that sort of media is not tends not to be well integrated into those sort of digital experiences, and that they tend to be primarily sort of text first, and then sort of experiential later. And so the exact type of things that, if you were standing in a classroom and thinking about what can I do to really help kids learn, and how can I show that, and thinking about those forms of active learning, that sort of hands-on learning, those are the exact types of things that we should be trying to replicate online, and also extend further. As Mike said, there's and Dee said as well, there's so many things that are possible, but so few of them are actually being utilized in existing curricula today for for a variety of reasons. And I don't fault teachers for any of that. It's aspects of the system in place.
So you've given us a little glimpse into what the future could be, and I'm going to ask all of you now to put on your get out your crystal ball, think about the future a little bit. Fast forward in your minds to I don't know, September 2023. There's been a vaccine. The pandemic is finally receding into our memories. We're in our institutions of learning. What does it look like now that's different as a result of what we've all been through? And Rod, why don't we go ahead and start with you, since you can bring that long view and broad view to this whole question.
Yeah, well, look, certainly I think what people are telling us is that things will be different. We've done loads of surveys. We've been told by parents, by learners, they think things will be different, that online learning is definitely here to stay. But I think the thing is that I've learned is that there's no silver bullets in education. There's no one thing. There's plenty of false dichotomies. There are plenty of people that tell you it's all got to be all face-to-face, it's got to be all online, it's got to be all technology. The fact is that there are not any silver bullets, but what we know is, because it's true in life, it's not just true in education, and why would education be any different, is that it does make a difference, that technology and online is making a difference. And although for many years now we've been saying we're at a tipping point in technology and learning, and we've never seemed quite to get there, I would say we are there now. I really do think we are, because we can see it happening, actually happening. And this crisis has accelerated it. And the reason is, yes, it's about access, and that really matters, to give people better access to education. But actually, it's also about inclusion. I mean, we can see that online is really great for some people, people that maybe don't necessarily thrive in a fully face-to-face environment for whatever reason. So it can be a much more inclusive experience. It can promote an even better connection between a teacher and a student. It doesn't always, but it certainly can. That kind of personal connection, certainly some of the data that you can get. And let's not forget as well that the world's changing, the world of work's changing. This very discussion we're having now, we're having digitally, digital skills, digital social skills, digital technical skills are incredibly important, and online's a great way actually of delivering some of that. So, you know, I think it's here. There's an irreversible change. There's an irreversible change that's happened, and it just means we've moved forward a bigger step than would have happened without this crisis. And I think it does mean that online will get much more attention, and the quality is going to matter more than ever. So the work that we all do to improve the quality of online, just as that's happened in brick and mortar, is probably the single most important thing now looking forwards.
That's great. Chandre, can you think 3 years ahead at Indiana Connections Academy? What's different as a result of this time that we've been through? And also, what would be different if you could wave your magic wand and put some things in place that might not exist quite yet?
Well, I mean, I think I would agree a lot with what Rod said, that I don't think we're going to be able to turn back. And I think the demand for online learning, or some fluidness in between there, whether that's hybrid, completely online, remote instruction, I think folks in general are going to see the ability to tap into that when they either need it or they want it. And to keep sort of the consumers, and I'm going to use consumers because that would even be our parents and our students in K-12, to keep them sort of happy and feeling satisfied about their educational experience, we too are going to have to be able to be even more fluid with how we think about virtual online education. To Mike's point earlier, you made me think this whole idea that teacher evaluation, or just the feedback to a teacher, take evaluation out of it, but just that formative feedback that you get in a classroom and that you get in online. We do that already. However, you sort of opened my eyes a little to this idea that we don't even use that sometimes always to the fullest extent that we could use it. And we have systems in place, but there's so much really getting even more intentional about what and how we want to deliver the best to our students and our families. I've noticed, and I'm a parent as well, and I have a first and a third grader, and I'm a teacher, but I taught high school, so first and third grade is a whole nother world for me in terms
you got
of
the stickers going, right?
Those Zoom meetings. But I am an educator, but that content is still slightly unfamiliar to me. And so having a bird's eye view into what my students were learning every day, how they were learning, what their teacher was delivering, how they were responding, where they got stuck, what were the barriers, where were they excelling. All our parents have now experienced that. And it has opened up eyes, and we will have some change will happen because of that. Parents have now been able to see what happens all day long in the classroom, and we may see the expectations slightly evolve a bit around parent involvement, what my students learning, how much are they learning, when are they learning it. And I think that's really exciting. We know in virtual education that it's a partnership. We cannot have a robust virtual experience for our students if we don't have our parents on board. I taught in a brick and mortar. I would say that isn't always the case. Students are with you all day and you've got a little bit more control over that experience, and you still need them. They're still a very important part, but the needs are different. But in the virtual environment, they control that space, the workspace, what students have access to at home, the scheduling, all of that. So I'm excited to see what they become, but I don't think we'll be able to go back. And I do think that the expectations will be much higher for those of us that already are in this world. But then I think collectively as a country and as a world, the whole idea that, well, why would I do a parent conference in person when I can just use Zoom? Why would I have to be in person to serve on the board when we could just use Zoom? So like all of these questions are now going to start changing for many entities around our space, where that line I think is going to be blurred between being face-to-face and being virtual, and how do we live somewhere in between? That would be my 2023.
All right.
Yeah, 2023.
I like it. I like it. Dee, what's your vision in 2023? Northeastern, first day of school, September 2023.
We're not going back. We're moving forward. What this emergency pivot to online in the spring really did was, really simply accelerate conversations that were already happening at many institutions about needed changes in higher ed. And so, I think what is going to happen, we're going to have many more learner options out there, or many more options for learners. It's going to be more inclusive, more diverse, more global, options that will be at different price points. So, if I think about some of the conversations we're having now, so, at my institution, I'm sure at many institutions, what we're doing right now is using the learnings from the past 6 months to think about, what can we deliver well online, and, what do we want to use that in-person experience for, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to enrich, the in-person experience. But we're also going to use online education to reach, new remote learners. And so we're gonna make what we do at these great institutions more accessible. And that might simply be because we're going to have a lot more content online, or because now many institutions are, they can now live stream the classroom, so remote learners can access, the classroom synchronously and interact with learners in the class. It's going to make these experiences more accessible, maybe because they might be more affordable. And that might simply be because they don't have to drive to campus as much. There are savings there. We can use online experiences to, reduce the time to, degree, to graduation. That could result in large savings. It gives people, more flexibility to balance, life, a job with learning. I think it's just going to be many, many more options out there for learners, which I think is what is needed to happen. And has been happening, but now is going to be happening more broadly. And fundamentally, it needs to happen. We're not going back. We are in an era of lifelong learning. And we know that, education, learning does not stop when our students leave campus. We need to be helping them throughout their lives. As their jobs get automated, how do we help them get that next job, a better job, or new jobs that are being created by these constantly evolving, technologies. So to me, and my team hear me say this ad nauseum. I'm sure they're just going to throw me out of the room if I say this. it's about giving learners options. We need many more options out there. And I think that's going to be a fundamental change because of what we're going through right now.
So let's pivot to, go ahead, Mike. And then we're going to pivot to a couple of questions.
That's such a great point. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The thing that really struck me actually is that I strongly agree with is that online will actually enrich the in-person experience. I couldn't agree more with that. I think the future is that, hybrid will become the default. However, I do believe that the on-campus environment is going to stay. I mean, the reason so many schools decided to keep their campuses open wasn't just because they felt like it. Frankly, it was taking on a lot of risk and a lot of cost to do that. Schools did that because students wanted that in-person experience, not just because they feel they're paying for it, but that's kind of part of the university. That's part of the college experience. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But that is also to say that online will increase the accessibility of higher education to a much broader audience, which I think will be phenomenal. So I think we'll see in 2023, every class will have an online option. There will be a way to sort of mix and match for students. There'll be a lot more flexibility that students and faculty really found a lot of value in, through this experience. And that ultimately will just be an acceleration, as several people have said, of trends that already were underway, but now we'll get there, maybe 5 or 10 years sooner, which I think is better.
That's great. Let's take a couple of audience questions. And Jared, I'm going to pitch one of these to you because I want to make sure that we give you equal opportunity, pain and suffering here on the panel. So one of them actually has to do with what we could sort of call the post-traumatic stress of students who have gone through this emergency remote learning and may have not had a great experience. What could or should we be doing as educators, as producers of education technology and so on, to encourage them to actively choose online or hybrid as part of the mix? Unfair question to ask you, Jared, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
No, that's perfectly fair. Yeah, I think what people are recognizing, and I think Chandre really sort of hit the nail on the head here, is that parents are now seeing what goes on in school, and obviously the virtual school is different than actual school, but there's still this sort of level of transparency and visibility that didn't exist previously. And part of that is seeing kind of like what their students are suffering through. And sorry, that's far too negative. But and the question is well, is this what you were doing in your classroom? Is this an online experience?
Are these 100 worksheets really what you were spending your hours doing while you were sitting at your desk, right?
and if you think about the parallel worlds of working on paper versus working digitally, is that when you're staring at a piece of paper, you're never thinking to yourself, oh, if only this piece of paper could be, have a video on it, be really engaging, and I could do 18 different things and talk to my friends on it and blah, blah, and do 1,000 different things. No, it never crosses your mind. But the moment you're sitting in front of a laptop and realizing, immediately, I could be on TikTok, I could be playing video games, I could be doing 1,000 things, and recognizing that the medium of computation is sort of infinite and vast because of every example of media and technology that is outside of education. It suddenly puts a lot of pressure on the educational experience for teachers, for students, for everyone. So for students who've been traumatized by it, I'm not sure I have much advice other than to say my hope is that the medium evolves such that the delta between literally what they're experiencing in every other aspect of their lives, what their parents are doing, and at work, is soon reflected in the type of media and experiences that they're seeing, on their screen.
Who else would like to weigh in on the? So Chandre, your kids, do you think that they would choose online in the future if they had a choice? Now that they've experienced a bit of that.
My own children, or
your own your own children. Your own children.
Yeah. I think for a long time they just thought I sat at a computer and was in meetings all day.
Which may have been kind of close to the truth.
Yeah,
but.
it's pretty close. But No, you know, we had that conversation with them. They're a little young, so ultimately, of course, it was their father and I's decision, really, if they went to virtual or, you know, the e-learning method. But I've always thought that that should be an option for them moving forward. And even before I came to the schools that I serve now, or to Connections Academies in general, to Dee's point, like, I became a teacher because I wanted to provide options to students. I wanted to make sure that they had all the opportunities to make whatever decision they wanted to post-secondary. That's why I became a high school teacher. And I feel the same way in my role today. Our job as educators is to make sure that we set students up to go after whatever opportunity they want to go after. So if my children want to do it, absolutely. I would need a learning coach because I cannot do both roles at all at the same time. But yeah, and I also wonder too, and I have, you know, friends with varying ages of children that have sort of floated in and out of virtual education even before the pandemic because of, you know, life circumstances or, you know, situations at school or situations at home or just wanting to try it out. So yeah, I mean, I think as students get older, they're able to articulate to their teachers, to their close friends, to their parents, to their trusted relatives and guardians and adults, hey, I want to do this. I want to try learning this way. They are learning. To Jared's point, TikTok can teach you. I mean, it can. Instagram, Facebook, actually, I mean, I would say, yeah, they are reading. They're taking in information. They're processing it. It just might not be what's maybe going to get them into Northeastern University, but
or it might.
Learning, and they're consuming information. And so what we teach them in the virtual, you know, fully virtual, is because kids do struggle with that. They associate computer, tablet with fun, and school's not fun, right? So they think I should be playing Fortnite because I'm on my iPad and not actually do school. It's really easy just to go over. But we teach them that that's digital responsibility, right? And you have to sort of separate those two things. This is the time for learning, and then this is the time for fun, but you're going to use technology to do both. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
You are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be an option and a choice. And I'm really excited that more folks have experienced it now and can speak firsthand about what that experience was like for them all the way up the ladder to our workforce. Our workforce can now speak to doing their jobs, even if it might not have been ideal, doing their jobs online. And that experience alone will change folks' idea about how to move forward. I mean, it completely changes their perception and their point of view. So that's exciting.
Dee, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
No, I was agreeing with Chandre. It's wonderful. But actually, maybe if I was to add, you know, a couple of things here, you know, I mean, it behooves us all as educators who know what's possible to show people, you know, what is possible, the art of possible for online education. You know, another thing that I think is really important, we have to make it easy for them, right? Everything from admissions decisions to financial aid packages to helping, you know, online learners figure out what courses they need, right? I want to get here. What courses do I need? I mean, we have to be able to make some of these things easier for them. I think another opportunity, and always it's one of these things, when we get to recreate something or create something from scratch, right? I mean, what else can we do here? You know, and one of the things we can do is start, you know, to build these connections with jobs. And I know this is something as well that Chandre and I were talking about, very passionate about, is how do we, you know, build these bridges to jobs with employers, to companies. And, you know, you can use that online environment to bring so much of that into the online learning experience. I think, again, that is a huge opportunity and something that learners and families care about a lot. So I just wanted to add those few things.
Rod, I see you. I know you have something to add here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I think it's such a great question. I think the question was, you know, to what extent does what's happened online affect the reputation of online education and online learning? And if I'm honest, that's probably been my biggest worry about what's happened, is that there's so much stuff that's happened, and of course not all of it, why would it be good? So and the risk is that when stuff happens that isn't great, that it kind of, it has that, oh, it's online, therefore it wasn't great. You know, you get that kind of association. That is a worry. I think the fact is that online education takes just as much investment as good brick and mortar education. It's really deep thinking that goes into the pedagogy and how the teaching and the learning come together, how the technology, how the curriculum feed into that, how you support the teachers, how you involve the parents. This is complex stuff, and it requires significant investment. I mean, I think that the way of what we need to do is probably give much more exposure, much more scrutiny to what is good and what isn't good, and so people can learn from it. More efficacy, more focus on the efficacy of these programs, the outcomes, whether it be employability. That type of scrutiny is going to be good, because there is some great stuff that happens online, but just as there is in the brick and mortar world, the stuff that isn't so great. And the other thing that's often said against online is that it's inequitable. You know, basically that not everybody has access to the technology. So this double-edged sword around technology. On the one hand, it's inclusive. On the other hand, it's exclusive. So there is something here as well about the public policy debate and investment, to think about technology as just an important a public right. It's just an important human right to have access to the right technology as it is to a brick and mortar school, and that probably needs to be elevated into the public debate and discourse too.
So we're going to do a whip around here, because we just have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure to give everybody a chance to get in one or two last words. So we're going to ask for, what one thing would you like to see us as an industry, education industry, do differently to make sure that we're getting the best out of online learning in the future? And Mike, I'm going to start with you. 30 seconds, and then kick it to somebody else.
I've got one. Yeah, look, what I'd love to see is a better, more collegial collaboration between universities, higher education institutions, and technology companies. I think there, for a long time, we felt that certainly this kind of like, there's higher ed and then there's vendors, and vendors are on the other side of the fence. They're in the other part of the conference. And I've often felt that was a challenge. I think there's so much good that can come out of technology companies and higher education institutions collaborating. And I'd love to see that.
So throw it to somebody else for 30 seconds.
Chandre.
I think I'm going to go with, in K-12, I would like to see, I'm thinking along the same lines as Rod, this public access, or thinking about internet and technology as more a utility. So like your gas bill, your electric bill, your water bill, you have internet. Because in K-12, unlike higher ed, where you sort of have that option to go, K-12 is not an option. Students have to go to school.